A heart monitor beeps in the silence of a New York ICU. Snow pounds the windows, but inside, a soft voice breaks the cold. "You're safe." "I'm here," whispers a nurse with an accent that carries halfway across the world. Her badge reads Maria Santos, Philippines. Tonight, she will calm a panicked patient, comfort a grieving family, and guide a team through chaos, all before most of America wakes up. They once said Filipino hospitality was a smile for tips, a customer service trick. But in hospitals from Manhattan to Los Angeles, those same skeptics now whisper a different truth. When life hangs by a thread, it's often Filipino hands holding it steady. This is the story of how a small island nation became the heartbeat of American healthcare, and why the kindness you can't fake is saving lives every single day. The story begins in the pre-dawn quiet of a Manhattan hospital. Fluorescent lights flicker against polished floors as night shift monitors beep in rhythmic counterpoint to the muffled city beyond the walls. A cold January wind howls outside, yet the corridor carries a surprising warmth. That warmth is not from the heating system. It comes from the steady voice of Maria Santos, a nurse from the Philippines whose calm presence seems to soften the sterile air. A patient stirs, anxious after surgery, and Maria's gentle words, "You're safe. I'm right here," settle over the room like a blanket. In that single moment lies a story more than a century in the making. The United States is home to more than 150,000 Filipino-trained nurses, and their influence reaches every corner of American healthcare. From New York to Los Angeles, from rural Midwest hospitals to busy trauma centers in Texas, Filipinos form the largest share of foreign-trained nurses in the country. In California, nearly 1 out of every 5 registered nurses is Filipino. This quiet army of caregivers began arriving in large numbers after World War II, when the U.S. government launched exchange programs to fill critical nursing shortages. But their reputation for extraordinary care began long before that. The Philippines inherited a U.S.-style nursing education system during the American colonial era at the start of the 20th century. English was the language of instruction, and American public health standards shaped the curriculum. By the time the Second World War ended, Filipino nurses were already known for rigorous training, fluent English, and an ability to adapt to new cultures. When U.S. hospitals faced a staffing crisis in the 1950s and 60s, recruiters naturally turned to the Philippines. Waves of skilled professionals crossed the Pacific, laying the foundation for a migration pattern that continues to this day. Yet the statistics only hint at the heart of the matter. What sets these caregivers apart is not merely technical skill, but a cultural quality known in Tagalog as malasakit. The word has no perfect English equivalent. It describes a deep empathy, a willingness to put oneself in another person's situation, to feel their pain and act on it. In Filipino households, caring for elders is not a duty imposed by necessity, but a joyful obligation. Children grow up watching grandparents tended with respect and patience. That upbringing travels with them across oceans. American patients notice it almost instantly. Dr. Linda Parker, a physician in Chicago who has worked with Filipino nurses for over 20 years, says, "It's like they're taking care of you the way they'd care for their own family." They don't just treat the illness, they treat the person. Research backs this up. Studies from the University of Pennsylvania show hospitals with higher numbers of Filipino nurses report lower patient mortality rates and higher satisfaction scores. Their cultural emphasis on teamwork and communication reduces errors and eases the stress of high-pressure wards. Still, some outsiders misunderstand their quiet cheerfulness. Maria remembers her first night in New York when a coworker teased, "You're too nice. It can't be real." She smiled and kept working. Hours later, during a sudden cardiac emergency, she calmly stabilized a patient while reassuring the terrified family. Her colleague, humbled, whispered afterward, "Now I understand." This pattern repeats across America. In a Dallas hospice, a Filipino caregiver spends the night holding the hand of a man with no relatives left. In Seattle, a neonatal nurse sings soft Tagalog lullabies to premature infants whose parents cannot stay through the night. In Miami, a post-operative patient recovering alone insists he survived only because a Filipina nurse stayed past her shift to comfort him. These are not isolated acts of kindness. They are the daily rhythm of Filipino caregiving. Economics play a role as well. The Philippines trains more nurses than it can employ domestically, creating a professional pipeline to the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and the Middle East. Remittances from overseas Filipino workers, known as OFWs, bring billions of dollars back to the Philippine economy each year. But for the workers themselves, this path is rarely just about money. Many leave families behind, sending half their paychecks home while building surrogate families in hospital wards thousands of miles away. Their dual identity, as breadwinners and cultural ambassadors, shapes the care they provide. Consider the story of Roberto, a respiratory therapist in Los Angeles. When COVID-19 struck, he spent weeks in an ICU where alarms never stopped, and fear hung heavy in every breath. He slept in his car to avoid exposing his elderly parents. "It wasn't heroism," he says. "It's what we do. You care for others, even when it costs you." Across the country, similar stories emerged. Filipino nurses forming the backbone of America's pandemic response, often at great personal risk. A 2021 National Nurses United report revealed that Filipino nurses made up nearly 25% of U.S. nurse COVID deaths, despite representing a much smaller percentage of the workforce. Why take such risks? Part of the answer lies in faith and community. Many Filipinos draw strength from a deep spiritual tradition, predominantly Catholic, but infused with a broader sense that service to others is sacred. Church groups often become extended families for newcomers, providing emotional support and a shared mission of compassion. This communal mindset helps explain their extraordinary resilience in stressful medical settings. Back in that Manhattan hospital, dawn filters through frosted windows as Maria completes her rounds. An elderly patient who once scoffed at her cheerful greeting now squeezes her hand and whispers, "You're an angel." She adjusts his blanket and moves quietly to the next room. For her, this is not heroism. It is simply life. The American families who meet caregivers like Maria often arrive with assumptions. Some believe Filipino warmth is just customer service, a smile for the sake of a paycheck. Yet day after day, night after night, those assumptions dissolve. Patients discover that the kindness is not a facade, but a cultural inheritance, honed over generations where family and community outweigh individual comfort. In hospitals from Boston to San Diego, administrators have learned to value this unique combination of professional excellence and heartfelt compassion. Many facilities now run targeted recruitment drives in Manila, Cebu, and Davao. Training programs in the Philippines align closely with U.S. standards, easing licensing hurdles. American universities partner with Philippine nursing schools, recognizing that the nation's blend of technical skill and human warmth is something special. There is also a subtle but powerful exchange happening in the other direction. Filipino nurses bring pieces of their culture to the United States, shared meals in break rooms, songs that echo softly down sterile corridors, stories of close-knit families half a world away. Patients and colleagues absorb these fragments and, often without realizing it, carry a little of that spirit into their own lives. As the camera pans out from Maria's ward to the bustling city beyond, we glimpse the broader truth. Filipino hospitality is not a marketing slogan. It is a living, breathing force that has quietly shaped American healthcare for over a century. Those who once dismissed it as fake have felt it in the steady hands that heal, in the patient voices that soothe fear, and in the silent sacrifices made during sleepless nights. From New York trauma centers to rural Midwest clinics, from the height of the pandemic to the routine miracle of everyday care, the evidence is overwhelming. Filipino nurses and caregivers embody a kind of empathy that cannot be faked because it is woven into the fabric of their upbringing. It is the echo of generations who cared for elders, the legacy of a nation that prizes family above self, the unspoken promise that no one will suffer alone if a Filipino caregiver is near. And so the narrative comes full circle. The same warmth that startled a skeptical coworker now saves lives and transforms perceptions. The world called their hospitality fake. America's patients know better. They have experienced it firsthand, in the quiet hours of pain and recovery, proving that Filipino kindness is as real and as necessary as the heartbeat of the hospitals they keep alive. Morning light spills across the Hudson River as the night shift ends. Maria exchanges a tired smile with the incoming team and steps out into the icy New York air. The chill bites through her coat, but she barely notices. Her phone vibrates with a video call from home. On the screen, the sun is already high over Manila, and her mother waves from the porch. Maria's father, recovering from surgery thousands of miles away, offers a thumbs up. The distance aches, yet the ritual grounds her. This daily connection is the lifeline that keeps so many Filipino caregivers balanced between two worlds. Across the United States, similar stories unfold. In Houston, a nurse named Jerome finishes a 12-hour shift in a trauma unit before logging into an online classroom to help his younger sister in Cebu with algebra. In Chicago, 2 Filipino respiratory therapists gather in a staff lounge to pray quietly for relatives facing a typhoon back home. They are healers abroad and breadwinners at home. Their lives a constant negotiation between duty to family and duty to strangers. Economists call this phenomenon transnational caregiving. In 2024 alone, overseas Filipino workers sent back more than $36 billion in remittances, a significant share of the Philippine economy. But behind the numbers lies a personal sacrifice. Time zones separate parents from children. Birthdays and graduations pass without them. The emotional cost is steep, yet their commitment to both family and patients remains unshaken. In the bustling corridors of American healthcare, this dual devotion shows itself in quiet moments. A Filipino nurse will offer to cover a colleague's shift without complaint, understanding that teamwork is not optional when lives are at stake. A caregiver will stay late to make sure an elderly patient's favorite blanket is warm, even when no one is watching. Colleagues often remark that Filipino staff create a sense of extended family on the ward, a culture of collective responsibility that improves morale and, studies show, patient outcomes. Research from the University of Pennsylvania confirms that hospitals with higher percentages of Filipino nurses report lower readmission rates and higher patient satisfaction scores. Administrators credit not only clinical skill, but also cultural values, respect for elders, patience, and empathy learned at home long before formal training. That training is itself world-class. Philippine nursing programs, taught largely in English, adhere to U.S. standards established more than a century ago. Clinical rotations emphasize adaptability, preparing students for everything from rural community health to high-tech intensive care. By the time they arrive in American hospitals, many Filipino nurses have already worked through typhoon relief missions or understaffed provincial clinics, experiences that hone calm under pressure. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, those skills were tested as never before. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Detroit, Filipino healthcare workers formed the backbone of the response. Long before vaccines arrived, they faced overflowing ICUs and scarce protective gear. According to a 2021 report from National Nurses United, nearly 1 in 4 U.S. nurse deaths from COVID-19 were Filipino, despite Filipinos representing a much smaller portion of the nursing workforce. Behind every statistic was a face, a mother, a father, a friend. Communities held candlelight vigils, and for many Americans, it was the first time they realized how deeply their hospitals depended on Filipino caregivers. Yet even in crisis, the stereotype of fake hospitality occasionally surfaced. Patients unused to such steady kindness sometimes questioned motives. But as days blurred into nights, those doubts dissolved. In ward after ward, it was the Filipino staff who remained by bedsides when family visits were restricted, who found creative ways to connect isolated patients with loved ones through video calls, who whispered prayers for strangers. The cultural root of this endurance is Bayanihan, a Filipino tradition of communal unity and mutual aid. In villages across the Philippines, neighbors once literally lifted houses to move them, a symbol of shared responsibility. That same spirit crosses oceans. Filipino nurses often say they treat patients the way they would treat their own Lola or Lolo, grandmother or grandfather. The result is care that feels deeply personal, even in the most high-tech environments. American colleagues take notice. Hospital directors speak of reduced staff turnover and improved team cohesion when Filipino professionals join their ranks. They bring a steadiness that changes the whole floor, says Dr. Kenneth Myers, chief of medicine at a major Chicago hospital. When things get chaotic, they don't just stay calm, they make everyone else calmer. The influence extends beyond hospitals. Filipino caregivers fill vital roles in private homes, long-term care facilities, and hospice centers. Families across the United States tell similar stories. A father's final months eased by a nurse who became like a daughter. A child with chronic illness who laughs more easily when his Filipino caregiver enters the room. These intimate spaces reveal the essence of Filipino hospitality, a presence that feels like kinship rather than employment. Meanwhile, back in Manila and Cebu, families adjust to long separations. Children learn to treasure nightly video calls. Spouses plan visits years in advance. The Philippine government recognizes their contribution, offering programs to support families left behind and to assist returning workers with reintegration. Yet nothing fully replaces the lost time. Caregivers abroad carry that quiet heartache, channeling it into the compassion they show patients. As twilight falls over another New York evening, Maria prepares for her second consecutive night shift. She clips her badge to her scrub top and glances at a photo of her parents taped to her locker. Her father's smile reminds her why she stays. The door swings open, and the familiar rhythm of beeping monitors greets her like an old friend. Another night of lives to save, fears to soothe, blankets to straighten. What outsiders once dismissed as surface-level cheer has proven to be the engine of resilience in America's healthcare system. Filipino hospitality is not performance. It is a legacy carried in every soft-spoken reassurance, every steady pair of hands guiding patients through pain and uncertainty. And as more Americans experience it firsthand, the verdict is undeniable. When the world calls for compassion, it often arrives with a Filipino accent. Night settles over the city again, but the hospitals never sleep. In Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, Houston, Boston, the rhythm of monitors and the soft shuffle of rubber soles continue without pause. Filipino nurses like Maria carry on, shift after shift, quietly sustaining a system that depends on them far more than most Americans realize. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates a shortfall of hundreds of thousands of registered nurses in the coming decade. Without international professionals, especially those from the Philippines, many hospitals would face dangerous staffing gaps. Inside the break rooms, laughter drifts in Tagalog and English, a music that binds weary teams together. A pot of adobo simmers next to the coffee maker, its aroma mixing with antiseptic. For many Filipino nurses, food is another language of care. They share meals with coworkers, feed exhausted interns, and offer tastes of home to patients who can swallow only a spoonful. Hospitality is not something they leave at the hospital door. It travels with them in every gesture. The pandemic magnified their quiet heroism. But even in calmer times, their impact is enormous. Studies from Johns Hopkins and the University of Pennsylvania show that wards with significant Filipino staffing experience higher patient satisfaction ratings and lower mortality rates. Administrators cite not just technical excellence, but an ethic of empathy that elevates the entire culture of care. One director in San Francisco said simply, "When the Filipinos are on the floor, everything works better." Patients, too, become lifelong advocates. A retired firefighter in Boston remembers how a Filipina nurse stayed past her shift to hold his hand through a frightening night of arrhythmia. A mother in Dallas speaks of the way a Filipino pediatric nurse turned her son's cancer treatments into afternoons filled with songs and origami animals. These memories outlast hospital bills and discharge papers. They become family stories, retold at birthdays and holidays, carrying the name Filipino as a synonym for kindness. What outsiders once dismissed as exaggerated friendliness is revealed, time and again, as a cultural inheritance. In the Philippines, elders are revered, neighbors are treated like kin, and the concept of Bayanihan, collective responsibility, runs deep. Those values cross oceans with every departing flight of newly trained nurses. They arrive not as temporary workers but as carriers of a centuries-old tradition of communal care, and the exchange is not one-sided. American colleagues learn from them, to slow down and listen, to treat patients as whole human beings, to see caregiving as more than a checklist of vitals. Many hospitals now offer Tagalog language basics to staff, a small acknowledgement of the culture that has given so much. Some teams even adopt Filipino customs, potluck meals, group prayers before difficult surgeries, small rituals of gratitude at shift change. For Maria, and for thousands like her, the work is both personal and profound. She remembers the long flight that first brought her here, the fear of a new country, the whispered doubts about whether her warmth would be misunderstood. Years later, she walks these halls with quiet confidence. Patients greet her with smiles. Colleagues seek her calm in emergencies. She knows that her presence, and the presence of her fellow Filipinos, has reshaped what compassionate care means in the United States. As dawn approaches once more, Maria steps outside after another long night. The city is still, bathed in the first pale light. She thinks of her family half a world away, and of the patients she has watched heal and sometimes say goodbye. She feels the fatigue in her bones, but also a steady pride. Around her, in cities and towns across America, tens of thousands of Filipino nurses are finishing their own shifts. Some will hurry to second jobs, others to quiet apartments where they will video call loved ones across the Pacific. All carry the same enduring spirit. The world once questioned whether Filipino hospitality was real. But in emergency rooms and hospice centers, in neonatal units and rehabilitation wards, patients and families have found the answer. They have felt the warmth of hands that never waver, the patience of hearts that never harden, and the devotion of professionals who treat strangers as family. This is the legacy of Filipino caregivers, a hospitality that cannot be faked, a kindness that saves lives, and a compassion that has become an essential thread in the fabric of American healthcare. The final image lingers. Maria, framed by the rising sun, her breath clouding in the cold morning air. Behind her, the hospital hums on. Ahead of her, another night of healing waits. Filipino hospitality is not a slogan. It is the steady heartbeat of care itself, quiet, tireless, and undeniably real.